The Hells Angels biker found the little girl gagged behind a workbench, and his cold justice echoed through the building. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. The workshop was dim, the air thick with the smell of oil and dust. The sound of metal clinking and the faint hum of an old fluorescent light hanging above was the only thing breaking the eerie silence. But then, there it was, a muffled cry. It was weak at first, barely audible, like a whisper lost in the vast expanse of the abandoned building. Jake Reaper Morrison, a Hells Angels biker, had been checking his bike in the back when the faint sound reached his ears. His instincts kicked in. He froze, listened harder, and the cry came again, this time louder. It was a small voice, a desperate plea. He was used to danger. He had spent decades riding with the Hells Angels, seen things that would turn most people's stomachs. But this was different. There was something vulnerable about it, something that didn't belong in the world he knew. He pushed open the door to the workshop, the hinges creaking as he entered. The sight before him was a shock, even for someone like Jake. A little girl, no older than 8 or 9, was tied up behind a workbench. Her hands were bound with rope, her mouth gagged with a filthy cloth. She trembled, her wide eyes locked onto his, filled with a mix of fear and confusion. For a moment, Jake stood there, his mind racing. His first instinct was to walk away. He had seen enough. But there was something in her eyes, something that pulled at him, something that made him take a step forward instead. Slowly, he crouched down to her level, his cold, intimidating demeanor softened by the situation. The girl flinched as he reached for her, but he spoke gently. "I'm not here to hurt you. You're safe now." Her eyes were still wide with fear, but there was a flicker of trust there. He carefully untied the ropes around her wrists, then removed the gag from her mouth. She gasped for air, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. Jake didn't know what to say. He had never been one for comforting words, but something about the girl's fear, her vulnerability, made him feel a strange need to protect her. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly. The girl winced, her body trembling as she remembered the events that led her here. They were going to hurt me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to escape, but they caught me." Jake's heart sank. This wasn't just a random act. Someone had planned this. Someone had meant to hurt her. And now, it was his job to make sure they never hurt anyone again. His hand clenched into a fist. This was no longer just about protecting the girl. It was about justice. Cold, hard justice. Without another word, he stood up and walked toward the door. He knew what he had to do. The sound of the engine revving outside was all he needed. As he stepped back into the street, the girl's voice echoed in his mind. He had saved her, but in doing so, he had sealed his fate. This was just the beginning. I walked into the street. The girl's terrified eyes still burned in my memory. She was safe for now, but the hard truth was sinking in with every step I took. The bastard who did this was still out there. I knew this wasn't going to end with me just saving her and riding off into the sunset. No, I'd gone and stepped into something I couldn't walk away from now. The ride to my garage felt endless. The engine roared beneath me, but it didn't drown out the thoughts racing through my mind. I couldn't help but think back to the past, the countless faces I had seen in similar situations. I wasn't a stranger to violence or suffering, but this was different. It wasn't the same as the hardened criminals I had dealt with in the club. This girl, this innocent, had been someone's target. And for what? For kicks? For power? It didn't matter. The moment I untied her, she became mine to protect. I knew that now. Pulling into the parking lot of the garage, I shut off the bike and stood there for a moment. The place was quiet, as usual. The flickering lights above cast a dim glow over the worn walls. The smell of oil and rust filled the air, familiar and comforting in a way. This was my world, a world where I fixed bikes, patched myself up, and kept to myself. But tonight, everything was different. Tonight, I had a responsibility that I hadn't signed up for. As I walked into the back office, I could feel the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't prepared for this. The girl, sitting on the worn couch in the corner, was watching me silently. She still looked scared, but there was a flicker of trust in her eyes. I couldn't blame her for not saying much. I knew what she was going through. It was the silence after trauma, the kind that swallowed words whole. I sat across from her, the weight of the moment heavy between us. "You doing okay?" I asked. My voice was rough, but I tried to soften it. She nodded, her small frame shivering slightly. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that came from not just physical pain, but the mental toll of being hurt by someone who should have protected her. "What's your name?" I asked after a beat of silence. She hesitated, eyes darting around the room, like she was trying to make a decision about whether or not to trust me. Finally, she spoke. "Megan," she said quietly. I nodded, my mind still swirling. "Megan, you don't have to be afraid anymore. You're safe here, but I need you to tell me who did this to you. If you can." She bit her lip, the fear creeping back into her eyes. "I don't want to get anyone else hurt," she whispered. "They're dangerous. They'll come after you too if they find out I told you." "No one's coming after anyone," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "I'll deal with it. You don't need to worry about that right now. Just tell me who did this." Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I saw something break inside her. She opened her mouth, but then closed it again, biting her lip as though she was wrestling with the decision. Finally, she spoke. The name Rick stuck in my mind. I had a feeling I knew exactly who this was. The kind of guy who thought his power came from hurting people, from terrorizing the weak. The kind of guy who wouldn't hesitate to make a little girl disappear. I clenched my fists, the anger surging through me. This wasn't just about protecting Megan anymore. This was personal. "Where is this warehouse?" I asked, already reaching for my phone to pull up the map. "I'm going to make sure this stops now." "No, please, don't. You don't understand. He's got people. He's connected," Megan begged, panic rising in her voice. "If you go after him, it'll only make things worse." But I wasn't listening anymore. I had heard enough. I had been down this road before. People like Rick didn't just walk away. They had to be stopped, and I was the one who was going to do it. "I'm not going to let him get away with this," I said, more to myself than to her. There was no turning back now. I pulled my jacket tight around my shoulders and headed for the door, my mind set on what had to be done. Megan was safe for now, but I was going to make sure Rick would never hurt anyone again. As I fired up the bike, I could hear the roar of the engine as it powered to life. The garage was now silent, the calm before the storm. I couldn't help but think about Megan's words, her fear. She didn't know what I had done, what I was capable of. But I knew, and I was going to make sure Rick did too. The road stretched ahead of me, the cold wind whipping through my hair as I sped down the street. This was my world. This was what I did. And tonight, I was going to send a message. A message that said, "You mess with the wrong people." The warehouse was just ahead. This was only the beginning. I rode through the streets, the roar of my Harley deafening in the night. The warehouse wasn't far now, and the closer I got, the more the weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me. Megan's face kept flashing in my mind, her eyes wide with fear, her voice trembling. I had to stop Rick. I had to stop him before he could hurt anyone else. The last thing I wanted was to bring more violence into this, but sometimes, violence was the only answer. As I approached the building, I saw the familiar flicker of lights in the windows. The warehouse was dead quiet except for the low hum of the machines inside. I parked the bike behind a dumpster and surveyed the area. No guards, no movement, just the eerie stillness of a place abandoned by good intentions. I knew Rick. I knew his kind. He wouldn't be here alone. There'd be others, watching, waiting, doing whatever it took to protect the empire built on pain and fear. I didn't care. I wasn't leaving without making sure Megan was safe. I walked up to the side of the building, my boots heavy against the cracked pavement. The door was locked, but I wasn't worried. I wasn't going to knock. I wasn't here to talk. With a swift kick, the lock broke loose, and I pushed the door open. The smell of old motor oil and dust filled the air. The lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows over the machinery. I crept further inside, my hand resting on the handle of the knife I kept tucked inside my jacket. This was the kind of place where silence meant trouble. I'd learned that the hard way. I heard movement ahead. It was soft at first, the shuffle of boots against concrete. Then, the faint sound of voices, low and indistinct. I crept forward, careful not to make a sound. I knew I was getting close. As I turned the corner, I spotted them, 3 men, standing around a workbench, their backs to me. Rick was one of them. I recognized his voice before I saw his face. "She's gone," Rick muttered, looking over a set of old blueprints spread out on the table. "I'll deal with her later. She's a liability now." I clenched my fists at the mention of Megan's name. My blood boiled, but I held back. This was the moment. I stepped out from the shadows, my boots hitting the floor with a loud thud. The men turned, their hands moving to the weapons at their sides. Rick's eyes locked onto mine, a look of recognition quickly replaced by anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" he spat. His voice rough. "I should have known it was you. You've always had a taste for trouble." I didn't answer. I just took a step forward, the knife glinting in the dim light. Rick's men hesitated, but Rick stood his ground. "You think you can just come in here and threaten me?" he sneered. "You're nothing but a washed-up biker. You think I'm scared of you?" I didn't need to say a word. I just took another step forward, my gaze cold and unwavering. One of Rick's men lunged at me, but I was faster. With a swift motion, I brought the knife down, slashing across his arm. He screamed and stumbled back, clutching his wound. Rick's other two men pulled out their guns, but they were slow. Too slow. I kicked the closest one in the chest, sending him crashing into a stack of crates. The other one fired, but I ducked just in time, and the bullet ricocheted off the wall. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the warehouse, but I wasn't focused on that. I was focused on Rick. He was backing away, his hands up in a defensive stance. "You don't know what you're messing with," Rick growled, but I was already on him. With a quick movement, I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the wall. The force knocked the breath out of him, and his eyes went wide with fear. "This ends tonight," I said, my voice low and cold. Rick didn't answer. He didn't need to. I saw the fear in his eyes, the realization that he had no control anymore. He was just another victim of his own cruelty. The silence was deafening now. The only sound was the labored breathing of Rick and his men. They knew they had lost. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, but I knew I couldn't stay. I had done what I came to do. The men wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't need to. This wasn't about me. It was about Megan, and I wasn't done protecting her yet. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the situation settled in. I knew this wasn't over. But for now, it would have to be enough. I walked back to the bike, my heart still racing, adrenaline still pumping through my veins. The sound of the warehouse doors closing behind me seemed deafening. I'd done what I had to do, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Megan was safe for now, but the road ahead was unclear. I started the engine and took off, the familiar rumble of the Harley beneath me giving me a sense of control, a brief respite from the chaos of the last few hours. But as I sped through the streets, the weight of what I'd just done sat heavily on my chest. I hadn't just taken down Rick. I'd sent a message to anyone who thought they could hurt people like Megan. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. Rick's men would have more questions, and the club would want to know what happened. I wasn't afraid of them. I'd been through worse. But the thing that bothered me wasn't the fight itself. It was the feeling that I was falling into something bigger than I could handle. The girl needed protection, and I couldn't just drop her off at some shelter and walk away. No, I had to see this through. I had to make sure she was truly safe. I pulled into the garage and parked the bike, the lights flickering above. Inside, Megan was still sitting on the couch, her face pale, her eyes distant. She didn't look like the same girl I had found earlier. She was still in shock, but she was strong. I could see that now. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. "Megan," I said, trying to break the tension. She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face for some kind of reassurance. "You're safe now," I said, my voice softer than I had intended. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't really hearing me. She was still processing everything. I sat across from her, watching her closely. "They won't come after you again," I told her, though I wasn't entirely sure if that was true. "Rick might be down for now, but that didn't mean his people were. I'll stay with you until you're ready to go somewhere else. You're not alone in this." She didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But then, she stood up, slowly as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her. "I'm not afraid of them," she said, her voice steady, though I could hear the tremble beneath it. "I'm afraid of what's next. What's going to happen now that you've taken care of Rick?" I leaned back in my chair, looking at her, considering her words. "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, they're going to come for you," she said, her eyes hardening. The club doesn't take kindly to people who step out of line. You're not just a random biker. You're part of something much bigger. She was right. I wasn't just a lone wolf anymore. I was tied to the Hells Angels, and that came with a price. It always did. But I couldn't let that stop me. Not now. Not when it came to protecting her. I stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm not afraid of them, I said quietly. And neither should you be. You're safe here, Megan. No one's going to hurt you again. She looked at me, and for the first time since I found her, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. But that hope was quickly replaced with doubt. What happens now? She asked. What's next for me? I have nowhere to go. I paused, unsure of how to answer. I didn't have a clear plan. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't leaving her to fend for herself. I'll help you find a place. We'll figure it out together, I said. But for now, just rest. You've been through enough. She nodded, her shoulders sagging as the tension seemed to melt away. I turned to leave, but then stopped at the door. You know, I said, my voice low, you're stronger than you think. She looked up at me, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I didn't have a choice, she said softly. I had to be strong. I gave her a small nod and left the room, heading for the back of the garage. As I sat there, staring at the faded walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Rick was only one part of the puzzle. There were more pieces out there, pieces I hadn't even begun to uncover. But one thing was certain, I wasn't backing down. I had a new purpose now, and it was bigger than anything I had ever known before. I stood in the dim light of the garage, my fingers tapping restlessly against the workbench. The noise of the bikes outside seemed so distant now, drowned out by the growing weight of the situation. Megan was asleep in the back room, her exhausted body finally finding some peace. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Every instinct told me there was more coming. Rick wasn't going to take his defeat quietly, and there was someone else out there. The one pulling the strings, the real enemy I hadn't seen yet. My mind raced as I went over the details. Megan's story had made sense, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. Rick's ties to the warehouse, his involvement with shady people, it all pointed to something bigger. I grabbed my jacket and pulled it tight around me, the cold air of the night seeping in. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait. Megan needed more than protection from Rick. She needed to be far from this mess, and I needed answers. I stepped outside into the cold night, my boots crunching against the gravel as I approached the bike. The plan was simple. Find out who was really behind all of this, and make sure they knew they couldn't hurt anyone again. But nothing ever went according to plan. As I revved the engine and made my way out of the parking lot, I couldn't help but think back to the years I'd spent running, hiding from my past, only to find myself stuck in a situation I never wanted to be in. The life I had built in the Hells Angels wasn't about saving people, it was about survival. But now things had changed. I had a reason to fight, and I wasn't going to stop until this was over. I drove through the empty streets, my mind as sharp as the cold night air. My thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of my phone. I pulled over and answered without hesitation. It was an unfamiliar number, but I recognized the voice immediately. You've made a mistake, the voice on the other end said, low and menacing. I tightened my grip on the phone, my heart rate quickening. Who is this? I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the anger I felt building inside me. You really think you can come into our town and start tearing things apart? The voice continued. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I recognized the tone now. This wasn't just some thug. It was someone important, someone who held power. I don't need to know who you are to make this stop, I said, my voice cold and steady. You think you can just walk away from this? You think you're in control? The voice sneered. I control everything. And now, you're going to regret stepping into my world. My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles white. I don't care who you think you are, I said, my words clipped. You've already lost. The line went dead, and I felt a surge of adrenaline flood through my veins. This was it. I wasn't backing down now. I slammed my phone into my pocket and gunned the engine, speeding off toward the direction the voice had come from. The clock was ticking, and I had a feeling that whoever this was, they weren't going to let this go quietly. As I neared the outskirts of town, I could see the outline of a large building in the distance, a place I knew all too well. The old factory, where the deals went down, where power was exchanged in shadows. The same place Rick had come from. The same place I would go to end this. I parked the bike behind a warehouse and silently approached the back entrance. My hand was steady on the handle of the gun tucked into my jacket. I wasn't going in unarmed, and I wasn't going in alone. I had made that mistake once before. The door was unlocked, and I slipped inside, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. I moved cautiously through the building, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. There were no guards, no signs of life. But I knew better than to think this place was empty. As I turned the corner, I saw them, 2 men standing in front of a closed door. I didn't hesitate. I moved in, the sound of my boots louder than I wanted. The first man reached for his gun, but I was faster. I slammed him against the wall, knocking the wind out of him. The other man turned just in time to see me coming. He pulled his weapon, but I was already on him, taking him down with a swift kick to the chest. He crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. I stood over him, my eyes scanning the room. The door was open now, and I could see shadows moving inside. It wasn't just Rick. It was bigger than that, and it wasn't going to end until I had answers. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. What I saw made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a place for deals. It was a base of operations, a command center. And whoever was behind this, they were playing a game I didn't fully understand yet. But I was going to learn. Fast. I moved deeper into the warehouse, my boots tapping lightly against the cold, concrete floor. The air felt thick with tension, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The dim light from the flickering overhead bulbs barely illuminated the vast room, casting long shadows across the piles of crates and abandoned equipment. I stepped lightly, careful to keep my presence undetected. My hand hovered over the handle of the gun tucked in my jacket, just in case. I had learned over the years that places like this were never as quiet as they seemed. As I neared the back of the warehouse, I could hear voices, muffled but distinct, floating through the cracked walls of a small office. One voice, deeper and more gravelly than the others, sounded familiar. Rick. He wasn't done yet. I crept closer to the door and pressed my ear against it. You really think you can get away with this? Rick's voice echoed in the stillness. We run this town. Everything happens because we say so. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This was bigger than I had thought. I don't care who you think you are. Another voice replied, sharp and tense. I'm going to make sure you pay for what you did. I froze. That wasn't Rick's voice. This was someone new, someone with a lot more anger in their words than anyone I had heard before. A part of me wondered if it was another member of the Hells Angels, someone coming for revenge. For what I did to Rick. The other part of me knew that wasn't the case. I wasn't here to start a war with the club. But this wasn't about the club anymore. This was personal. I needed to make sure Megan was safe. And to do that, I had to confront whoever was behind this. The door creaked under my hand as I slowly pushed it open, just enough to peek inside. My heart skipped a beat when I saw him. Rick, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. The stranger was taller, broader, his face shadowed by a black hood. He looked like trouble, and I wasn't in the mood to find out just how much. You've already cost me enough, Rick said, his voice tight with rage. But this is something else. If you think you can walk away from this without consequences, you're dead wrong. The stranger's voice was low, deliberate. You're the one who doesn't understand, he said. I'm here because of what you did. To that girl. That girl. Megan. My heart pounded in my chest. She's nothing but a pawn to you, Rick sneered. You don't get it, do you? She doesn't matter. She's just a way to get to me. All of this, all the mess you've made, it's your own fault. I felt a surge of anger in my gut, but I kept myself in check. I wasn't going to let my emotions get the best of me. Not here. Not now. I waited for the right moment, my finger twitching near the trigger. The room was silent, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Then, Rick broke the silence. You think you can take me down? You think you can mess with my business and just walk away? He reached for something in his jacket. A gun. The stranger stopped him with a sharp movement, his eyes cold. Don't, he said. I've got plans for him, but we do this my way. You don't get to pull the trigger. Not yet. I knew then that this wasn't just some petty revenge scheme. This was something much bigger. This was about power, control, and people who thought they could get away with anything. The kind of people who believed they could destroy lives and walk away scot-free. I wasn't going to let that happen. Slowly I stepped away from the door, keeping my movements smooth and deliberate. I couldn't confront them here, not without tipping them off. But I had a plan. I would make sure Rick didn't get away with this. He wouldn't walk free. Not while I was still standing. I needed to act fast, get to Megan, and get her out of here. I knew this was bigger than just Rick, and I wasn't ready to face the full scale of what I was about to get into. But there was no turning back now. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't leaving until I knew Megan was safe. With one last glance over my shoulder, I slipped into the shadows and headed toward the back exit. I wasn't sure how much time I had, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to take down everyone who thought they could hurt her. And when I was done, they would know exactly who they had crossed. I moved quickly, slipping out of the back exit of the warehouse and into the cool night air. The weight of what I had just learned pressed heavily on my chest. I knew this wasn't just about Rick anymore. The whole thing had expanded into something bigger, darker, and much more dangerous than I had originally thought. Megan's life was still in the balance, and the people behind this, whoever they were, would not stop until they had everything under control again. I had to move fast. I walked briskly toward my bike, my mind racing through the next steps. I had to get to Megan and make sure she was still safe. Then, I had to figure out who else was involved in this. I wasn't going to let them hurt her or anyone else. I swung my leg over the bike and started the engine, the familiar hum beneath me grounding my thoughts. The streets were quiet as I sped through the empty roads. I didn't know how long I had before Rick and his men would come after me again, or worse, go after Megan. The thought of her being in danger made my blood boil. I couldn't let that happen. I had to get back to the garage. It was the only place she'd be safe for now. As I approached the familiar building, I saw a shadow standing outside. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was Megan, standing in front of the garage, her small figure barely visible in the dim light. I immediately slowed the bike and pulled up to the curb. She turned as I came closer, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, fear, but also something else. She had made up her mind. Before I could say anything, she spoke. "I can't stay here anymore," she said, her voice small but firm. "I'm not going to be the reason you're dragged into something worse." I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice low, confused. "They know who I am now," she said, her eyes darting nervously around. "Rick is just one part of it. There are others. People who can make life miserable for anyone who crosses them. I can't let that happen to you." My chest tightened. I knew what she meant, but I couldn't let her run away, not like this. "You're not running away from this," I said, my voice steady. "We'll figure this out. You're safe here." She shook her head, her face pale with worry. "You don't understand. They're too powerful. They don't just hurt people, they ruin lives. And I've seen it happen before. I've seen what happens to people who don't listen to them." I took a step closer to her, my heart aching for her. "I don't care about any of that," I said, more firmly this time. "You're not alone in this. I'll protect you." She looked at me, her expression softening slightly, but the fear in her eyes never left. "But what if it's not enough?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer for that. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this end here. I couldn't. Megan needed me, and that meant I couldn't walk away. I stepped off the bike and walked over to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out together. I promise." She hesitated for a moment, her body stiff as if she wanted to pull away, but then she slowly nodded. I could see the trust in her eyes, even though she still had doubts. "I'm not running anymore," I said softly. "We're going to end this, one way or another." The words were heavy, and as soon as I spoke them, I felt the weight of the promise. This was no longer just about me or Megan. It was about taking down a dangerous network of people who thought they could do whatever they wanted. It was about justice, and it was about making sure that no one could ever hurt her again. We walked back into the garage together. Megan didn't say anything more, but I could tell that she was still processing everything. She was scared, and I couldn't blame her. She had every right to be, but she wasn't alone anymore. I was going to make sure of that. I didn't know what was waiting for me, or how this was going to play out, but I was ready to fight, ready to protect her, and ready to finish what I had started. I stood in the quiet of the garage, Megan sitting across from me, her eyes still uncertain but filled with a growing sense of trust. The air was thick with the tension of the night, the quiet before what I knew would come. My mind was running through every possible scenario. What would happen next? What was the best move to make? Who I could trust? And what it would take to make sure Rick and his people never hurt anyone again. I glanced at the old workbench, the tools scattered across it like remnants of a past life. My past life. It wasn't a glamorous one, but I had learned something over the years. You never stopped fighting until the job was done. And this job wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I looked over at Megan, who was nervously twisting a thread from her jacket. She looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. "You're scared," I said, my voice soft, knowing she probably didn't want to admit it. She nodded, but there was no shame in her face. She had every right to be scared. "I know," I added, keeping my tone gentle. "This is bigger than we thought. But you're not alone in this. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at me then, her eyes wide, full of both fear and hope. "But what happens next?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if it's not enough? What if they come for us?" The weight of her words settled into me, a sharp reminder of just how dangerous this had become. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about taking down an entire network of people who thought they were untouchable. I couldn't promise her everything would be okay, but I could promise one thing. I wasn't going to let them take us down without a fight. "We take it one step at a time," I said firmly, making sure she could see the resolve in my eyes. "First, we figure out who's really behind all this. Then we deal with them." I walked over to the desk, pulling out a map I had been using to track my movements in the past few days. The warehouse, the spots Rick had frequented, the people he had been meeting with, it was all connected. But there was still something I was missing. Something big. I spread the map across the desk, pointing to the various locations. "We know Rick has connections. But this?" I pointed to a new location, a building on the edge of town I hadn't paid attention to before. "This is where it all comes together. If we're going to stop this, we have to start here." Megan stood up and walked over to the map, her eyes scanning it. She knew this town better than anyone, and I could tell she was thinking, trying to piece together what I was missing. "That place," she said quietly, her finger tracing a path on the map. "That's where the club does its business. It's hidden, even from most of the guys in the Hells Angels. Only the big players know about it." I turned to her, surprised. "How do you know that?" She looked up at me, her expression hardening. "Because my uncle's been involved with them for years. And that's where the real power lies." My chest tightened at her words. If her uncle was involved with the people running this show, we were dealing with a much bigger threat than I had anticipated. I couldn't ignore the fear that gnawed at me, but I wasn't about to back down. "We'll deal with it," I said, more to myself than to her. "But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." Megan shook her head, determination flashing in her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere. You're not getting rid of me that easily." I looked at her, and for the first time since I found her, I saw a strength in her that I hadn't noticed before. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor, and she was going to help me bring this all to an end. "All right," I said, a half-smile tugging at my lips. "We'll do this together." The plan was simple, but the risks were enormous. We would need to get inside that building, find out who was really pulling the strings, and take them down, before they could hurt anyone else. "We need to be smart about this," I said, my voice serious. "We can't go in all guns blazing. We need intel. We need to know who's who." Megan nodded, her jaw set. "We'll get what we need. I know this town. I know where to start." We gathered what little gear we could find. Phones, flashlights, anything that might be useful. I grabbed my jacket and threw it on, the weight of it reminding me of the past, of the man I used to be, and the man I needed to be now. I wasn't leaving this place without answers, and I wasn't leaving Megan behind. As we stepped out into the cold night air, I could feel the weight of the decision we were about to make. There was no turning back now. Whatever was waiting for us in that building, we were going to face it head-on. Together. I looked at Megan one last time before we reached the entrance to the building. The night was cold, the kind of cold that made your breath visible in the air, and the quiet seemed almost unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. We had come this far, and now the only thing left was to finish what we started. The old building in front of us loomed large, its windows dark and unwelcoming. It looked abandoned, but I knew better than to trust appearances. This was the heart of everything, the place where it all came together. "Ready?" I asked, glancing at Megan. She nodded, her expression serious. She had been quiet since we left the garage, her mind no doubt racing with the same thoughts I had. This was a dangerous game we were playing, and the stakes were high. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't backing down. "Let's do this," she said softly. Together, we walked. toward the door. I kept my hand close to my jacket, where my gun was holstered. The last thing I wanted was to walk in unprepared, but I also didn't want to make any noise. The door was old, rusted, but still solid. It creaked as I pushed it open. The sound echoed through the building, and I couldn't help but feel like we were intruding into something much darker than we had imagined. Inside was a cavernous space, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch on forever. The faint smell of oil and machinery lingered in the air. I glanced around, making sure we weren't being watched. The place was empty, eerily so, but I knew better. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed us. We moved carefully, making our way through the maze of old equipment and abandoned storage units. My boots echoed on the concrete floor, too loud in the silence. Megan walked beside me, her eyes scanning every corner, every doorway. She was on edge, but she didn't flinch. She was stronger than she realized. "They're not here," she whispered, her voice tight. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't so sure. The deeper we went into the building, the more I started to feel like we were walking into a trap. It was too quiet, too empty. There should have been someone by now. "I don't like this," I muttered under my breath. Megan looked at me, her expression hardening. "Neither do I." Suddenly, I heard something, a faint noise, like a door creaking open. We both froze, listening. There it was again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing from the far side of the building. I motioned for Megan to stay close and moved toward the sound. We were getting closer. I could feel it in my bones. The tension in the air was thick, like something was about to explode. I wasn't sure who we were going to find, but I knew one thing. This was it. This was the moment we had been preparing for. I was ready to face whoever was behind all this, even if it meant everything. As we rounded the corner, I saw them. 3 men, standing in the middle of the room, their backs to us. They hadn't noticed us yet. I quickly assessed the situation. 2 of them were armed, one of them holding a gun. In each hand, scanning the room. The third, the one standing in the middle, was a familiar face. I couldn't believe it. It was the man I had been looking for, Liam. He was the one behind all of this. The one pulling the strings. I felt a surge of anger in my chest. I knew there was something off about the whole situation, and now it was clear. Liam had been using Rick to get to Megan, to use her as leverage. And I was the one who had been drawn into his game. I stepped forward, my hand still near my gun. "Liam," I called, my voice cold. He turned, a smirk spreading across his face when he saw me. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You've been a problem from the start, haven't you? First, you mess with Rick, now you're here, poking around like you own the place." I stepped closer, not taking my eyes off him. "You're done," I said, my voice low. "This ends now. You've hurt too many people." Liam laughed, but it wasn't a sound of amusement. It was cold, calculating. "You think you can just walk in here and end this? You think you're the hero in this little story? You've got no idea what you're really dealing with." I took another step forward. "Then tell me," I said, my voice sharp. "Tell me who's really behind all of this. Who's really pulling the strings?" Liam's smirk faltered for a second, but only a second. He looked over his shoulder at his men, then back at me. "You really don't get it, do you? It's not just about you or her. It's about power. It's about control." I didn't need to hear any more. Without warning, I pulled my gun and aimed it straight at Liam. "This ends tonight," I said, my voice steady. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The 2 men raised their guns, but I was faster. The first shot rang out, hitting the man closest to me. He fell to the ground, and the second man hesitated, giving me just enough time to take him down as well. Liam's face twisted in fury. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." He lunged for a weapon on the nearby table, but I was already moving, my feet carrying me toward him. Before he could reach it, I tackled him to the ground, the weight of the situation finally crashing down on both of us. I wasn't going to let him get away. Not now. Not ever. I slammed Liam into the cold concrete floor, my hands tightening around his throat as he gasped for air. His eyes, filled with fury and disbelief, locked onto mine. He had thought he was in control. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated what I was willing to do to protect the people I cared about. "This ends tonight," I growled, my grip tightening further. "You're not getting away with this. Not after everything you've done." His hands scrabbled at my wrists, but he was too weak, too slow. His words came out in a strangled gasp. "You think you've won? You think you can just come in here and take me down? I have connections, people who will make sure you regret this. I leaned in closer, my face inches from his. I don't give a damn about your connections, I snarled. I'm done playing your games. I let go of his throat, standing up and stepping back. He coughed violently, sucking in air as if he'd been drowning. I could see the terror in his eyes now. The smugness was gone. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the countless lives he had ruined, the people he had hurt. It was about making sure no one else would suffer because of him. Who's really behind this, Liam? I demanded, my voice sharp, demanding answers. He didn't answer immediately. His mind was clearly working overtime, calculating his next move. But the fear in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. You're not going to get away with this, he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. You don't know who you're messing with. I crouched down in front of him, making sure my face was just inches from his. Tell me who's behind this, or I'll make you wish you had, I said, my voice calm but filled with menace. He looked at me, his lips pressed tightly together. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to break. But then, slowly, reluctantly, he spoke. It's not just me, he said, his voice cracking. It's bigger than that. There's someone higher up. Someone who's been pulling the strings from the start. He paused, his breath shaky. Someone with power. Someone who can make you disappear without anyone noticing. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Rick and his small-time thugs. There was someone else, someone far more dangerous, someone with the kind of power that could ruin everything. Who? I pressed, my voice rising. Who is it? Liam hesitated, his face contorted with fear. I don't know their name. They keep to the shadows. They work through others. But they control everything. They control who lives and who dies. My mind raced. The pieces were starting to come together, but I didn't have all the answers yet. I had to find this person, and I had to stop them before they could do any more damage. I stood up and paced the small room, thinking quickly. How do we get to them? I asked, still not sure if I could trust what Liam was saying. You can't, he muttered. No one gets to them. They don't make mistakes. You've already pissed off the wrong people. I turned back to him, my jaw clenched. I don't care about that, I said. I'm going after them, with or without your help. But I need information. Now. He swallowed hard, clearly weighing his options. For a moment, it seemed like he might keep quiet, but then something in his eyes changed. Defeat, maybe. He finally spoke again, but this time his voice was softer, almost pleading. You won't make it out of here alive, he said. They'll kill you before you even get close. But if you really want to know who they are, you need to follow the money. I stared at him, confused. What do you mean? He nodded slowly, his eyes shifting nervously to the door. There's a ledger. A book with everything you need to know. It's in the back office, locked up tight. Find it, and you'll have your answer. My mind was racing as I processed his words. A ledger. A book that could hold the key to everything. But why was it so important? Why hadn't Rick just destroyed it? Where is it? I demanded. Back office, Liam whispered again, his voice barely audible. But it won't matter. They'll come for you. They always do. I didn't have time for his threats. I turned and strode toward the back of the building. If I don't make it out, someone will, I muttered under my breath. But I'm not leaving without that book. I knew I had to act fast. The longer I stayed, the greater the chance they'd figure out what I was up to. I made my way to the back office, my hand tight on the gun at my side. If there was a chance to take this down, to put an end to everything that had happened, this was it. But I wasn't sure what I would find once I got inside. Whatever it was, I knew it wouldn't be easy. I opened the door to the back office, and the light inside flickered as I stepped in. My heart raced. This was it. I had to find the ledger, and I had to find it fast. I moved quickly, my boots silent against the cold concrete as I stepped into the back office. The flickering overhead light barely illuminated the room, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch into the corners of the small, cluttered space. The smell of stale air and dust hit me immediately. This place had been neglected for years, but there was something in the air tonight, a sense of urgency, of something about to unfold. My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place, anything that might hold the answers I was searching for. And then I saw it. A thick, leather-bound book, sitting on a desk in the far corner, just beyond a stack of papers and old blueprints. It was exactly where Liam had said it would be. My heart raced as I walked toward it, the weight of everything that had led me here pressing on my chest. This was it. This was the key to everything. I reached out and grabbed the ledger, feeling the cold, worn leather beneath my fingertips. As I flipped it open, the first page was blank. My stomach dropped. I flipped further, but it was all the same, blank pages, as if the book was some kind of decoy. But then, I reached the back, and there it was. A list. A list of names, dates, and amounts. It was a ledger of transactions, dirty deals, bribery, and payments to people high up in local government, law enforcement, and even a few businesses I recognized. The sheer scale of it hit me. Like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a few crooked individuals. This was a network, a well-oiled machine, working in the shadows, pulling strings across the city. And Megan, somehow, had become part of that machine. I clenched my fists, the anger rising in my chest again. I had thought Rick was the real enemy. But this was the real threat. These people didn't just destroy lives, they controlled everything. I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling with each name I saw, until I stopped at a particular entry. A name I recognized. Liam's name was at the top of the list. But what really stood out was the next name, right under his. It was the name of a politician, someone with significant influence in the city, someone I had heard of but never thought I would see on a list like this. That was when I realized just how deep this ran. This wasn't just a gang operation or a small-time racket. This was systemic corruption from the top down. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I read further. The names were all connected, like a chain of people working in secret, covering for each other, exchanging favors, and keeping the rest of the world in the dark. But I couldn't let this stay hidden. I had the proof now. I stood there, staring at the pages, a storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. I had to get this out. I had to expose them. But it wasn't that simple. As I was about to close the ledger, I heard a noise, a footstep, faint but clear, from the hallway. I froze, my heart racing. I wasn't alone. I quickly shoved the ledger into my jacket, trying to calm my breath. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Someone was coming. I grabbed the gun from my holster, my hand steady now, ready for whatever was about to happen. The door creaked open, and I turned, aiming the gun. But it wasn't who I expected. It was Megan. She stood there, her face pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice harsh. She didn't answer right away, stepping into the room slowly. "I heard something," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know if you were okay." I lowered the gun, letting out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "I'm fine," I said, trying to reassure her, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. She stepped closer, her gaze moving from me to the desk where I had just hidden the ledger. Her eyes narrowed. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice quiet but insistent. I hesitated, not wanting to involve her more than I already had. But she deserved to know the truth. She had been dragged into this mess from the start. I met her gaze and nodded slowly. "It's bigger than we thought, Megan," I said, my voice low. "These people, Rick, Liam, they're just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole system of corruption behind this. And it goes all the way to the top." Her face grew paler, and I could see the realization hit her. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at the ledger in my hands, knowing that we were at a crossroads. "We expose them," I said, my voice firm, but my mind racing with the weight of what that meant. "But we have to be smart. We have to be careful." Megan nodded, her expression hardening. "I'm with you," she said, her voice strong. "Let's finish this." I could see the fire in her eyes now. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was ready to fight back. And with that, I knew we couldn't stop. Not now. Not when we were this close to taking everything down. I stood in the dim light of the back office, the ledger still hidden in my jacket, my thoughts racing. Megan was beside me, her eyes sharp, reflecting the determination she hadn't shown when I first found her. She was no longer the scared girl who needed saving. She was ready to fight back. Together, we were going to bring down a network of corruption that ran deeper than I had ever imagined. I could see it in her eyes. She had made up her mind. There was no turning back. "We need to get this to the right people," I said, my voice low, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Megan nodded, the fire in her eyes unwavering. "Who do we trust?" she asked, her voice steady. The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt the full weight of our situation. We couldn't just walk out of here and hand this over to anyone. Whoever was behind this, whoever was pulling the strings, had people everywhere. They controlled too much. One wrong move, and we could end up like the rest of their victims. We don't trust anyone just yet, I said, my voice hard. We need to make sure we're not walking into another trap. Megan stepped closer, her gaze never leaving mine. Then what do we do? She asked, her voice tinged with urgency. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts that was swirling inside my head. We get out of here first. Then we figure out our next move. But we don't rush it. We can't afford to be reckless. I knew I was right. The stakes had never been higher. We had the evidence we needed, but we had no idea who else was involved. There could be eyes on us right now, waiting for us to make a move. You're right, Megan said, her voice soft but firm. But we can't just leave it like this. We need to stop them before they can hurt anyone else. I nodded, my thoughts shifting to the people we'd seen at the warehouse, Liam and Rick, and whoever else was involved. We couldn't let them get away with this. We will, I said, my voice resolute. But we do it smart. We take them down piece by piece, starting with the ones we know. Then we go after the big players. Megan nodded, her face hardening with determination. What's the first step? She asked. I glanced around the office, my eyes scanning the shadows for anything useful. We need to get the information out of here. Make sure it's safe. After that, we go to someone we can trust. Megan didn't argue. She knew this was bigger than both of us, and there was no easy way out. The only thing we could do was take the fight to them. Do you know anyone we can trust? She asked. I hesitated. There weren't many people left who I could count on. People who weren't already bought off or too deep in the system to care. But there was one person who owed me a favor. I know a guy, I said slowly. He's clean. He works outside the system, away from the people who are controlling all this. He can help us. Megan raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. And he'll just help us, no questions asked? I gave her a grim smile. He doesn't have a choice. I turned toward the door, knowing we had to move quickly. Let's get to him before anyone else does. We slipped out of the back office, moving silently through the building. The lights overhead flickered as we made our way to the exit, every step calculated, every sound amplified in the quiet. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me again. The building loomed behind us, dark and silent, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The people behind this would come after us, and we would have to be ready. Where is he? Megan asked, her voice cutting through the tension. He's not far, I said, my eyes scanning the street ahead. Just a few blocks away. We made our way through the empty streets, the quiet of the night broken only by the sound of our footsteps. I kept my senses sharp, knowing we couldn't afford to be followed. Every corner could hide an enemy. We reached the building, a small, inconspicuous place tucked between a row of old shops. I knocked once, twice, and waited. The door creaked open, and a familiar face appeared in the doorway. You're late, he said with a smirk. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. I didn't expect to need your help again, I said, my voice tight. But we do. We've got a problem that needs fixing. He stepped aside, letting us in. The small, dimly lit room was cluttered with old equipment, but it felt like a safe haven compared to the chaos outside. What kind of problem? He asked, closing the door behind us. The kind that could bring the whole city down, I said, my voice low. And we need you to help us bring it to light. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask more questions. I'm listening, he said. I pulled the ledger from my jacket, setting it on the table in front of him. This, I said, is just the beginning. We had the proof. And now, with this man's help, we had the chance to finally take down the people who thought they were untouchable. I stood in the dimly lit room, watching as the man flipped through the pages of the ledger, his eyes scanning the names and figures with a quiet intensity. Megan stood beside me, her arms crossed, her expression tense but focused. We had brought the evidence, but now came the real challenge, getting it out to the right people without being caught in the crossfire. The man didn't say anything at first, his face unreadable as he processed what we had just handed him. Finally, he looked up. This is bad, he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. This is bigger than you think. These people have their hands in everything. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I had known it was going to be dangerous, but seeing the reality of it, hearing the confirmation, made it all feel so much more real. We need to expose them, I said, my voice steady, but my mind racing. We need to make sure this gets out to the right people. People who can actually do something about it. The man gave me a long look, sizing me up. You don't understand what you're up against, he said slowly. These people are connected to too many high-ups. You can't just take them down like that. They'll come for you. I didn't flinch. I had already known what we were up against, but hearing it out loud was another thing. I had been down that road before, fighting against people who thought they were untouchable. I wasn't about to back down now. I don't care who they are, I said firmly. I've seen enough. I'm done letting people like this hurt others. We take them down, piece by piece. Megan spoke up then, her voice determined. How do we do that? She asked, her eyes fixed on the man. He hesitated, then sighed. You need a plan. A good one. And you need to get it to the right people. Not just anyone. If you go to the wrong people, they'll bury it. The urgency in his voice told me he wasn't just talking about a few bad eggs in law enforcement. These people had power, real power. I looked at Megan, and she looked back at me, her face set with resolve. We had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Where do we start? I asked. The man didn't hesitate this time. You need to get this to someone who can't be bought. Someone high enough up that they can move on this without being stopped. I knew exactly who he meant. There was one person in my life who was untouchable, someone who had always operated on the edge, but with honor. Someone who could help us, even if it meant stepping into a war. I know just the person, I said, my voice steady. We can't waste any more time. We need to move quickly. The man nodded, closing the ledger and handing it back to me. Good luck, he said, his voice low. You're going to need it. I took the ledger, slipping it back into my jacket, then turned toward Megan. Let's go, I said. We left the small, cluttered room and stepped out into the cold night air. The street was empty, the only sound our footsteps echoing in the silence. The city felt different now, darker, more dangerous. But I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't. Not after everything that had happened. As we made our way to the bike, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about taking down Liam and Rick. This was bigger than that. These people weren't just running some small-time operation. They were embedded in the fabric of the city itself. But I was ready to tear that fabric apart. We couldn't keep running. We had to stand and fight, or they would keep taking more. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. We had come too far to back down. We were in this together, and together, we were going to make sure the city would never be the same. I started the bike, and Megan climbed on behind me. As we drove through the streets, the wind whipping past us, I could feel the weight of the upcoming battle pressing on me. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. We were going to expose the truth. We were going to take down the people who thought they were above it all. And no matter what happened, I wasn't going to let them win.